Kate Winkler Dawson has worked as a TV news field producer in San Francisco and as a radio news writer and producer in New York City before settling down in Austin in 2005. Kate is a senior lecturer in broadcast journalism at the University of Texas at Austin. She has also produced almost 24 documentaries, including pieces for Nightline, WCBS, and Fox. She is a superfan of network television news programs she lovingly refers to as death shows like Dateline or 48-Hour Mysteries, a passion that spills over into her two exceptional books about murder and forensics, Death in the Air and American Sherlock. Kate recently took time out to sit down at Book People for a chat with Austin Liti Limits' Larry Brill.
So, Kate, thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Let's start with the telling of the stories.
Sure.
Where did this need to tell stories come from?
Well, I think from some fantastic schooling in the Austin public school system. And I went to Dawson, and I went to Keeling, and then I went to the Liberal Arts Science Academy. And I always took English classes, and of course what any good English teacher is going to tell you is, you know, at the heart of telling stories is finding those really good characters. So, yeah, if you want to pull somebody into caring about a subject, don't just talk about the subject, find somebody who cares about the subject and tell their story. So it probably started with the fine teachers of Austin Independent School District.
I remember when I was growing up and first learning journalism, everything was just fact-based: who, what, where, when, why, and how. And now everything is based on personalities and characters and drawing out the stories of the people who are involved.
Making them relatable to other people.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely.
So what was it that drew you to the TV news business?
Well, when I was at LASA, the Liberal Arts Science Academy, I went into I thought I was going to go into English Lit, you know, and maybe become an English literature professor. But I had a teacher who wanted us to do a fun exercise about interviewing for jobs. And so she brought in these various professionals, and we would do these fun fake interviews just to give us confidence, I think. And so they brought in the news director of a radio station here in Austin, who was it was B93, 93.3 at the time, and it was a manager actually. He came in and he interviewed me, and I made up some funny stories and why I should take this job as like a disc jockey at a radio station. And at the end, he told my teacher, he said, actually, I would give her an internship because she was pretty convincing. And that's sort of where it started. And the next step from radio to me was television. And so I got an internship at KVUE. And then I think it was, I don't know, television just really appealed to me because there were so many different things to do. I'm a multitasker, and that is the personality for sure for not only somebody on television news, but for a TV news producer, which is what I ended up being. Somebody who can juggle a lot of different things and has a lot of different interests and a lot of different skill sets. And so that was, you know, why I ended up in TV. It was so appealing. It still is appealing to me.
Yeah, as someone, you know, who shares that experience in the TV news business, you and I both know how important the producer is, but they never get the credit. The person who gets the credit is the one who's out there on the screen.
Yeah, luckily we are not always the ones who get fired when something goes wrong. Those people out in front of the camera get fired a lot, and I always manage to keep my job no matter what happens. So, but I agree. I mean, it is hard, you know, to be a producer and you are out there and you're being paid well, hopefully, but then the talent is, you know, being paid triple or quadruple of what you're getting. But really, for me, it was a very, very satisfying career. Yeah. And it helped so much with book writing.
Yeah. My first novel that I wrote, Live at 5, was a comedy about the small market TV news business and some of the really weird things that went on. And I remember explaining it to one of my colleagues when I was still working at the TV station. I said, you know, it's about a guy who's trying to build a rating, so he hires a stripper to be his anchor. He didn't flinch. He didn't look. He just said, it could happen.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, I could see that. So how did you migrate into documentaries?
Well, probably people won't admit this, but I do think the super secret love that many people who are in television have is of documentaries. Because sometimes we get a story in TV and you don't want it to be just limited to, if you're in local news, 1.5 to 2 minutes. Yeah. Or even if you're at a network, it could be at, you know, the most 40 to 45 minutes if you're lucky. And so I think, you know, being able to sort of have a much larger playing field and being able to develop a story over time and to have more control over that story, it was really attractive to me.
How was the transition from TV journalism, documentaries, and then you waited until 2018 to write your first full book, but making that transition to long prose form?
Right.
What was that like?
It was hard. So I started at actually in about 2014 is when I started doing book proposals. And then I started writing Death in the Air, which was the first book, at about 2015. So that's not particularly a long book career so far, but it is, you know, it's got a few years. So it was a weird switch because I had my master's degree and it's in print journalism, but I had never worked in print journalism. I got the degree and I never did anything with it. And then when I became full-time faculty at the University of Texas, I got pregnant and with twins and had children and realized that documentaries were just not going to work for me anymore. I just couldn't hop on a plane at a moment's notice. I couldn't go raise, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars when I just really had to be concerned about my family. And I talked to a friend of mine who's a really known writer, and I said, I need to have a creative outlet because I love teaching, but because I'm this multitasking person, I also need to do something else that's creative. And he said, write books. And I said, I teach people how to write in 5-word sentences with no commas or compound sentences. I'm not really sure I know how to write a book. And he said, yeah, you can do it. Don't worry about it. I was seeing so many positives. And so, you know, eventually I just really realized that writing books did a couple of things for me. One, it fit my lifestyle much better than doing documentaries. I am someone who goes to bed at like 8:30 at night, and then I'll wake up at 3:30 or 4 in the morning, and my kids wake up at 6 with the dog, and so I can work from 4 to 6 no problem, and that just really isn't what I was able to do with documentaries.
Did you have to work at the stylistic part of it?
I think that I had to think of this almost like a TV series, like for somebody who's married with 2 children and several jobs. I watch an incredible amount of procedural television, right. Cop shows. And so I really think of these things as a TV series. I will probably never write a book that couldn't be a TV series. And as sort of, you know, non-literary as that sounds, it really helps me in terms of scenes. Like, okay, we're back from commercial break, AKA coming into chapter 2. What do I want to open with? Like if I were watching this, what would I want? What's the visual that I would want? And that comes back to television really informing the way I write books.
So tell us about Heinrich, the American Sherlock.
Yes.
What was it that drew him to you?
I have this checklist of things that I have to go through to know if I'm going to be involved in a project. And the Fog book checked off all of these things, and certainly Sherlock did. That it has to be somebody who's relatively unknown, and Edward Oscar Heinrich doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. He probably will after this, but he doesn't have one right now. So he doesn't have a Wikipedia page. And I also need a time period that's really compelling, and when I saw that he worked between 1910 and 1953, those are the best time periods ever, those 40 to 50 years. And I want it to be in a city that I feel like I can build during that time period, so you can feel who the people are and what the money's like and what Christmas dinner is. And San Francisco is one of the places where I lived and I worked and I loved. And he worked in Berkeley and in San Francisco. And so, and it really he had to have changed history, and he did. Yeah. And it has to be, to me, history that is relevant now, and forensics is very relevant now.
Very quickly, though, what do you consider his most important case?
I think just sort of procedurally, his most important case probably was the Martin Caldwell case, where he invents a technique where you can photograph two bullets side by side, and it was the first time it had ever been done, and it's still a technique that's used now. It's not the sexiest case. I mean, these are all cases that are really compelling. But it's a case that was really, really important in forensics, and so I kind of put that in there.
Okay.
But I also will say, more than like for developing one tool, Heinrich had two big legacies. One, he was really the first forensic scientist to create like a way to organize evidence. They had never done that. It was sort of all willy-nilly. He sanitized and he kept things in a very particular order, and it was a blueprint for other forensic scientists in the future. And also he was a professor, and as somebody who also teaches, I know that I can be such an important influence on my students who then go out. I mean, I look at my Twitter feed and my students are everywhere. They all have the blue check mark next to them. They are all really well known. And I take like a 1% credit for that. And he had an incredible influence. He taught at UC Berkeley for 40 years. Yeah. So.
Okay. So now it's time for the Austin Liti Limits lightning round.
Oh gosh, Larry.
10 questions. We stole this whole concept from inside the actor's studio. We stole it from somebody who stole it from somebody, and so on down the line. Your first question is, what's your favorite word?
I like benevolent. I think it just sounds, it's a nice word, and then I think it just sounds really nice, benevolent,
What's your least favorite word?
I will say this, and I'm going to say it slowly because I always mess it up, anonymity. And I hate that word because I read my audiobook for this, so I was the narrator, and it took 5 minutes to get it done. Anonymity. I still hate it.
What turns you on?
Books. Not really. I would say like a good meal, any kind of a good meal I think is like home cooking. I've just been on the road for 11 days, so if I eat at one more restaurant, I will flip out. So I would take like a good home cooked meal, definitely.
What turns you off?
Screaming children, which I have occasionally, but mostly I have really good kids, so I'm happy about that.
Well, since you're happy about that, what is your idea of happiness? In the broad scheme of things.
Family, that's all nothing else matters to me but family. I mean, and I tell my kids that all the time, that, that I will move wherever they go. That I did that with my parents. I wanted to be close with my parents, and I will go wherever they go, because that's it for me. Family is it.
Who's your favorite author?
I would say Eric Larson. I really have a big author crush on Eric Larson. Of course, it started with Devil in the White City, which most people know, but he's just out with a Churchill book that I'm going to read. And I just think that his writing is incredible. He's the king of narrative nonfiction. So,
if you could be a character in any novel from any period of time in the history of the world, who would you be?
Mark Twain wrote this fantastic book, one of my favorite books that no one's read, called Pudd'nhead Wilson. Mm-hmm. Have you ever read it?
I have read it.
Okay, so he was an attorney, a local attorney in a tiny town, and he solves this really, really big mystery that turns into a tragedy, but he uses forensics, bad forensics, but still it's, 19th century forensics. And so I would definitely be, even though he was ostracized in the town, he turns out to be the only smart person in this town, and I like that feeling, so I would be Pudd'nhead Wilson.
What profession would you like to attempt if you were not doing what you do now?
So I've actually thought about that, because I've thought about going back to school. So I don't think this would happen, but I would definitely go into forensic science. In a lab. I think labs are fascinating. Or I think the most realistic thing is I would go back to law school. My father was a law professor at UT for 37 years. So that had a really big influence on me. So absolutely law school would be the number one thing. But I would have a specialty in criminal law and forensics.
Yeah. What profession would you least want to try?
I think I would have a really difficult time in a job maybe as like a solo engineer. I thrive on interacting with people. I love teaching. That's why I like my colleagues. I love students just come into my office constantly. Even when I'm at home, I'm on the phone, and I just have a need for companionship. And so it would be whatever job that is not involving being completely by myself, which I get the impression that engineers can work on their own. And I have a lot of respect for that. I just think it would be maddening for me.
Yeah. Final question.
Okay, I'm ready.
The big one.
Yep.
If heaven exists, what would you like God to say to you when you get to the check-in desk?
Probably, this is going to sound really cheesy, but probably that he believes that I've loved as much as I can. I've hit the capacity. That would be the only thing I would ever regret, is not spending enough time with my family. So I think it comes back to kind of like my capacity to love my kids, who are going to be here tonight.
Great.
I've had to redo my excerpt because it was a really violent. I have to tell Becca Oliver that my excerpt's a little more bland because my kids are going to be there. So
great. Okay, Kate Winkler Dawson, thank you very much. Appreciate you talking to us here on Austin Liti Limits.
Thanks, Larry. I appreciate it.